The knock at 6043 wasn't a ghost, it was a blueprint, Reddit drama mystery. Back when I first moved into the old brick building on Wyndham Street, I was mostly chasing silence. After years of city noise rattling my skull like a pinball machine, I needed the quiet to breathe again. The listing for apartment 3A promised just that, a cozy unit on the top floor, away from street sounds, with thick walls and the kind of neighborly tranquility that makes you forget people even live next door. But peace, I learned, is often just a curtain drawn over something much darker. The building was strange from the start. Not eerie in the classic sense. No flickering lights or cold spots, just misaligned with itself. Hallways that felt too narrow, ceilings lower at night than in the morning, and that uncanny silence that had originally drawn me in. It wasn't natural, it was forced, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I dismissed these impressions in the beginning. What mattered then was that my life was finally mine again. I had just left behind a marriage that had frayed into 1,000 unspoken resentments, and I wanted no one, needed no one. I wanted routines, muted colors, my own heartbeat as company. Apartment 3A gave me that for a while, until one morning in late October, when I heard it. A single knock, not at my door, but somewhere above. I paused mid-toast, head tilted, waiting for it to repeat. Nothing. I chuckled at myself. Probably pipes or the building settling. But then it came again the next day. One knock. Sharp, deliberate, followed by silence thick as syrup. I asked the landlord, Mr. Collier, about it when I ran into him in the stairwell, but he waved it off with a polite smile. "No one above you," he said. "You're on the top, remember?" Which I was. That was the whole point. Still, the knocking became a ritual. Every morning at 6:43 a.m. one knock. No more, no less. I began setting alarms to catch it. Sometimes I would be sitting, staring at the ceiling at 6:42, heart beating a little too fast, and sure enough, bang, like a finger from the attic demanding to be acknowledged. I checked the roof access. Locked. I climbed the fire escape to the roof. Nothing up there but gravel and antennas and a view of the city that should have comforted me but didn't. I told myself it was probably a vibration from the radiator, echoing oddly through the structure. That lie held until the morning I heard something after the knock. A shuffle. A slow, dragging sound. That's when I started to lose sleep. I began researching the building's history. The public records were sparse, especially for a place this old. Built in the late 1920s, survived 2 fires, changed ownership multiple times. But there was one mention, a buried article from 1971 about a man named Hu Talmadge who had vanished without a trace. He lived in apartment 3A. My apartment. The article said he'd complained to neighbors about noises in the ceiling, about footsteps, about being watched. I stared at that line for a long time, fingers trembling on the mouse pad. I was already too deep by then. I couldn't pretend anymore. I started noticing other things. A faint smell of tobacco that didn't come from me. An ashtray outside my window one morning that hadn't been there the night before. A shadow. No, more like a dark shimmer that sometimes crossed the hallway wall when no one was there. I bought cameras. I installed one facing the ceiling, another by the door, and one pointing out the window. They all malfunctioned. Not failed, not corrupted. Just stopped, like they'd been asked politely to look away. That's when I stopped trusting my apartment and started documenting everything. I filled notebooks with timestamps, sounds, temperature changes. I marked the knock every morning. I noted when my furniture had been slightly shifted. I even measured the position of objects with a ruler. Once, my mug was moved 3 inches to the right. I hadn't touched it. You'd think the logical mind would blame sleepwalking, stress, or a slow descent into madness. But I knew better, because I never slept anymore. And madness doesn't leave fingerprints on your bathroom mirror. I didn't tell anyone. Who could I tell? My therapist would suggest grounding exercises. My sister would insist I needed to move. But I needed to know. I couldn't leave not knowing. One night, I stayed up with a tape recorder, hoping to catch the sound of the knock. What I got instead was breathing. Long, ragged inhalations. As if someone were crouched just above my ceiling, lungs filling with damp insulation and secrets. The next morning, I knocked back. Once, right at 6:43. Nothing happened for 3 days. No knock, no shuffle. Just silence. A silence so loud it made my ears ring, and then, the 4th morning at 6:43, came 3 knocks. Not loud, not angry, just 3. A change. I didn't respond, I couldn't. I left the apartment that day, walked the entire city for hours, not knowing what I was avoiding. But when I came back, my door was ajar. I never leave it that way. Nothing was stolen, nothing moved. But the apartment smelled different, like lavender and burnt paper. I started staying at Muddles after that, telling myself I was just taking a break, But I still went back. Every few days, I needed to see if the knocks would return. And they did. Sometimes one, sometimes three. Never consistent anymore. It was like it was trying to communicate, but the language was broken. One evening I met an old tenant in the laundry room. Her name was Ethel, eyes milky with age but sharp in their sadness. When I mentioned I was in 3A, she froze, said nothing for a full minute. Then muttered, "That room, it remembers." I asked her what she meant, but she shook her head and wheeled her laundry cart away, as if the words had burned her tongue. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat back against the wall, watching the ceiling. At 6:43, nothing came. No knock, no sound, but my closet door creaked open, slowly, like a yawn. I had locked it. I had taped it shut. That was the night I found the envelope. Inside the closet, nestled in a corner where the boards didn't quite meet, was a yellowed envelope addressed to the next one. Inside was a single Polaroid of a man I didn't recognize, standing in this very apartment. His eyes were blacked out with ink. On the back, in shaky cursive, was written, "He's not gone, just quiet." I almost screamed, almost tore the place apart. But something in me knew I was being watched, not in the normal sense, not through a peephole or a lens. It was more intimate, like being watched from inside. I left the apartment again, spent a week at a friend's place, told her nothing. When I returned, the Polaroid was gone, but in its place under my pillow was a new one. Same man, no ink. His eyes were now visible, and he was smiling, not a warm smile, a knowing one. I wanted to burn the place down, but I didn't. I couldn't, because I needed to understand. Because deep down I realized the apartment had chosen me, and I wasn't done listening. Not yet. I began to feel time differently inside apartment 3A. It wasn't just the clocks, though they did sometimes slow inexplicably or tick in reverse for a second or two. It was deeper than that, like the apartment ran on its own rhythm, one that didn't sync with the world outside. I'd sit by the window at dusk and watch people go about their lives, watch the sun set, watch the lights flicker on in buildings across the street, but inside the air remained heavy, like noon stuck in amber. And always, the quiet pressed against my ears like cotton soaked in molasses. After the second Polaroid appeared, his eyes now watching me with unsettling familiarity, I stopped trying to convince myself this was coincidence. Something was not just haunting the apartment, it was interacting with me. And worse, it was enjoying itself. I tried leaving again, renting another place across town under the excuse of work travel, but it followed me. Not the entity, at least I don't think so, but the signs. My coffee table there shifted slightly every night, a new Polaroid on my pillow after the third day. My phone would ring once at 6:43 a.m. every morning. No number, no message, just a single vibration. And when I returned to 3A again, it felt warmer, welcoming, like it knew I was back where I belonged. I became obsessive. I mapped the entire floor plan on graph paper, recorded temperature readings every hour, searched for hidden compartments or hollow walls. The layout made no architectural sense. I measured the hallway outside my unit, 12 feet long, but inside, the wall that should have bordered it was only 10 feet across. Where had the other 2 feet gone? I tore into the drywall one night with a hammer, adrenaline making me reckless. Behind it was not insulation or brick, but more wall. Seamless. Too clean. As if it had always been there, freshly sealed. The landlord didn't even reprimand me when he saw the hole. He only looked at it, sighed, and said, "Some things are better undisturbed." That was the first time I realized Mr. Collier knew more than he let on. I pressed him, cornered him in the stairwell, demanding answers. His face drained of color as I spoke. Eventually, he muttered, "The man before you, John." He said the same things. Sounds in the walls. Photos that shouldn't exist. And he stopped eating, stopped sleeping, started writing on his skin. After a while, he vanished. No trace. I asked if he had filed a missing persons report. No one to report it. No one came looking. I returned to the apartment and checked every cabinet, every drawer. Found nothing of John. But then under the bathroom sink, in a gap between the pipes, I discovered a journal wrapped in plastic. Water-stained, warped, but readable. It wasn't dated but written in a frantic scrawl that changed over time, steadily losing coherence. The early entries described exactly what I had experienced: the knocking, the photographs, the strange temporal shifts. Then drawings started appearing. Sketches of a figure, vague at first, then more detailed. Long arms, eyes too wide, a grin that stretched impossibly. The last few pages were barely legible. One line repeated again in ink pressed so hard it tore the page. He's inside the walls. He's listening. He remembers. That night, I dreamed of the man in the Polaroid. He sat in my kitchen, sipping from my mug, humming tunelessly. eyes on me the entire time. When I tried to speak, he held up a finger. Shit. I woke to find the same mug on the floor, shattered in 4 clean pieces. No wind, no movement. It had simply fallen, or been dropped. After that, the rules changed. The knock now came at random times. Once at 3:14 a.m., another at noon. Then twice in a row, minutes apart. The closet door no longer creaked open. It opened silently wide and only when I wasn't watching. I started catching glimpses in the mirror. Not a full reflection, just a shimmer behind me, always disappearing before I could turn. I kept the lights on at all hours. I stopped undressing in the bedroom. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were everywhere. I wrote my experiences online, anonymously at first. Forums dedicated to the paranormal responded with the usual suggestions: sage burning, cleansing rituals, iron nails, salt circles. I tried all of them. The apartment seemed amused. The next morning, a circle of salt I had poured in the entryway was rearranged into a spiral. My sage bundle burned twice as fast as it should have. I placed a crucifix above my bed. It melted. Not burned. Melted like plastic. I knew then this wasn't a ghost. It wasn't dead. It was something else entirely. Something old. Something that fed on attention. It wanted acknowledgement, wanted a witness. And I had given it just that. I began digging into the name from the article. Hoag Talmadge tracked down a library archive with more details. Turns out he had been an amateur radio operator obsessed with communicating across unknown frequencies. He claimed to have discovered a signal that came not from this world but from the spaces between walls. He built equipment to amplify the silence, as he called it. Neighbors thought he was mad. Then he disappeared. I returned home and turned on every radio I owned, shortwave, AMs, FM, even old baby monitor I'd found at a thrift store. Tuned each to different frequencies. Most played static. But one at 108.4 FM hissed with a sound I couldn't describe. Not static, not voice. More like breathing layered under a faint metallic scrape, repeating every 7 seconds. I reclayed it back, reversed it, slowed it down. Hidden beneath, I heard a voice. My voice, saying things I never said aloud. Private thoughts, regrets, words I'd only ever written in my journal. And then a whisper that wasn't mine: "You're almost ready." I unplugged everything, ripped cords from sockets. But the sound kept playing. From my phone, my laptop, my TV. I smashed them all. The silence afterward was worse. I realized I had given it enough to enter me. Not physically, but mentally. It was inside my memories. My guilt, my fears. I started forgetting things. What day it was. What month. People's names. I'd stare at photos and not recognize the faces. My own reflection began to change. Just slightly, enough to unsettle. Eyes darker. Smile crooked in ways it hadn't been before. Once I caught myself smiling in the mirror even though I wasn't. The photo man's grin. I became obsessed with staying awake. Sleep became a portal. Every time I dozed off, I woke up in a different position. Fully dressed when I'd gone to bed in shorts. Covered in inked words I didn't write. Once, I found the message let him in scrawled across my chest in Sharpie. My fingers still held the marker. I had no memory of it. I began calling people from my past. Ex-girlfriends, old friends. Trying to tether myself to reality. But they said I sounded strange. Said I asked them things they didn't understand. Said I wasn't the me they remembered. I visited my sister unannounced. She wouldn't open the door. Said my eyes looked wrong through the peephole. That she could hear me humming when I wasn't making a sound. The apartment was changing me, and I still couldn't leave. Not really. Even when I was miles away, it pulled at me. In dreams. In silence. In empty hallways that echoed like its voice. I decided I needed answers. If I was going mad, I wanted to see the edge. So I made a plan. I set up a voice recorder, 4 cameras with independent battery packs, 1 in every room. I took caffeine pills, taped my eyes open, sat in the middle of the living room. I whispered to the air, "I'm ready." And then I waited. At 6:43 a.m., the ceiling cracked. Not a knock, a full fissure. Dust rained down. My camera battery drained instantly. The temperature dropped by 15 degrees in a second, and something lowered itself from the crack. Not all the way, just a hand. Long, bony, veined like a tree root. The fingers curled toward me, then pointed at the closet. I didn't want to move. My legs wouldn't respond. But somehow I was standing, walking, opening the door. Inside, not the usual dusty coats and boxes. It was a tunnel. Wooden, dark, stretching beyond the apartment's limits. I stepped in. I had no choice. The last thing I remember was hearing the whisper again, "You're the new room." And then the door shut behind me. I don't remember walking through the tunnel. Only that it felt wrong, as if every step took was undoing something inside me. Unraveling my sense of direction, my memories, myself. The air was thicker there, sweet with mildew and something like old perfume. The wood beneath my feet groaned with each step, not like it was decaying, but like it was speaking in a language my ears weren't built to hear. There were no lights, no glow from behind, no visible end ahead. Yet I kept moving, as if gravity now obeyed something deeper than physics. Eventually, I emerged into a space that couldn't exist. It looked like an exact replica of apartment 3A, but it was hollow. Every item, every wall, every corner was perfectly recreated but stripped of warmth, like a photograph taken seconds before a disaster. The couch was the same, but the cushions were too smooth, never sat in. My mug was on the table, whole again though I had smashed it. Even the window showed a view of Wyndham Street, only the people outside didn't move. They stood frozen, mid-stride. Mid-conversation, like a paused video. I turned in a slow circle and it dawned on me this wasn't a copy of my apartment. It was my apartment from some other thread of reality, a place pulled out of sequence. I reached for the front door, locked. Not physically, but with something more final. It wouldn't even rattle. That's when I heard him. The hum. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the low drone in the walls. Then louder. Clear. That same melody I'd heard in my dreams. He was here. I turned toward the bedroom, and there he stood, the man from the Polaroids. Pale skin, eyes black and endless, lips curled into a grin that didn't stop at his cheeks. He wore my clothes, spoke with my voice. But he was not me. He tilted his head, and I heard the sound in my own throat. A breath I hadn't taken. "It's time," he said, though his mouth didn't move. The words echoed inside me, reverberating through my bones. I backed away, stumbled into the kitchen, knocking over a chair that made no sound when it hit the floor. "You invited me," he said again. "You watched. You listened. You knocked." His eyes darkened further until they were voids. "You don't get to leave now." I screamed. I'm not sure if it was audible. My mouth opened, my chest heaved, but nothing came out. He advanced slowly, arms out, palms open. The pull. Not just physical, but mental. Like he was siphoning something from me. My memories, my regrets, my secrets. One by one, thoughts began to fade. My father's face, my first kiss, the name of my high school. All unraveling like strings from a sweater. I tried to fight it, to focus, to anchor myself with pain. I bit my own tongue, dug my nails into my palms, screamed inside my head. And then, I remembered the journal. The scrawled warning he's not gone. Just quiet. I grabbed the closest object, a fake lamp that flickered even though it wasn't plugged in, and threw it at him. It passed through his chest like mist. He laughed. No, I laughed from his mouth. "You think this is new," he whispered. "You're just the latest echo." I ran. Not toward the door, but back to the closet. It was still open. The tunnel's still there, but it wasn't the same tunnel. This one pulsed. The wood had veins. It was alive. I didn't care. I plunged in. Crawled. Clemmed. The air grew thinner, the walls tighter. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just kept moving forward, or downward, I couldn't tell. And then I dropped, landed hard. Darkness exploded into light. I was back in apartment 3A, my apartment 3A. The lights were on. My phone buzzed on the table. The clock read 6:42 a.m., 1 minute before the knock. I stood still, every muscle tense. A single bead of sweat rolled down my temple. Then bang, one knock. As usual, the closet was shut. The furniture was as I'd left it. But something was different. I went to the mirror in the hallway, looked myself in the eye, and froze. My reflection didn't move. It smiled, just slightly, and then mimicked me again, like it had forgotten for a second how to be me. I stepped back. It didn't. My throat tightened. My skin felt foreign. I didn't feel alone. I tried to leave the apartment. The door opened fine. The hallway looked normal. Neighbors passed me with tired eyes and morning coffees. No one looked twice. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd escaped. But that night as I lay in bed, lights on, music playing softly, I glanced at the wall and saw a crack. Small. Almost invisible. But new. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing at first. Then, faintly breathing. I moved out the next day. Didn't even pack, just walked. Never looked back. Rented a cheap place across the river and tried to start over. Weeks passed. No dreams. No Polaroids. I started believing I was safe. Until a letter arrived. No stamp. No return address. Just slid under my door one morning. Inside was a photograph, a Polaroid of me sitting in my new living room, sleeping. The caption read, "You brought me with you." I burned it. Changed apartments again. But the cracks followed. The knock returned, sometimes at 3 a.m., sometimes during dinner, sometimes while I was driving, on windows, on mirrors. Once on the inside of my fridge, I stopped sleeping entirely, and that's when I noticed others. People who looked tired, eyes darting, standing too still in public places, humming to themselves quietly, tapping their fingers 3 times on railings, chairs, tabletops. echoes, like me. I approached one once at a laundromat. She was staring at the spin cycle like it held secrets. I whispered, "Do you hear it too?" She didn't flinch, just said, "He doesn't forget." I asked who. She turned and smiled, lips twitching like they didn't belong to her. "You know who." Then she walked out, leaving her clothes behind. I realized then it wasn't about apartment 3A. That was just the doorway, the origin, the birthplace. The thing, whatever it was, had spread, like mold, like a contagion. Passed through touch, through sight, through thought. The more you understand it, the deeper it goes. I moved again. I never stay in one place longer than a month now. I don't speak to people for more than a few minutes. I don't look in mirrors for more than a glance. I've learned to ignore the knocks, to pretend the breathing isn't there. But some nights, when I forget myself, when I let my guard down, I still hum the tune, his tune. And when I stop, I swear I hear him finish it. Just once. Just one final note. I don't know how much longer I have, but I'm writing this so someone knows. So someone can resist. Because he's patient, he's watching, and he always finds a way in, even if you never open the door. I stopped marking time in days. It became more reliable to track existence by incidents, by knocks, by glances in the mirror where the reflection hesitated, by objects displaced ever so slightly. They were my new calendar, my clockwork reminders that I was never alone anymore. Since fleeing apartment 3A, I'd moved 6 times in 9 months, changed jobs twice, abandoned every attempt at building relationships. I had no friends left to call, no one who hadn't grown wary of my half-sentences and darting eyes. Every time I tried to explain, they either laughed or grew cold. One of them, Emir, a coworker from 2 cities ago, asked me over beers if I'd finally gone off the deep end. Is this some kind of schizophrenia thing? He'd asked, half joking, half hopeful. I didn't answer. I had long since given up trying to convince people. The truth wasn't something you could explain. You had to feel it, like a pressure behind your eyes, a vibration in the silence, the kind of understanding that changes your brain shape just from knowing it. And once it changes, nothing ever fits again. I began keeping a record. Not digital, those malfunctioned too easily around him, but analog, dozens of notebooks filled with narrow handwriting, coded symbols, times and locations of events. I noticed patterns. Certain numbers recurred frequently: 3, 7, 43. Certain phrases would echo in my thoughts: he's waiting, he's underneath, he never leaves. I stopped trusting my thoughts entirely. Some of them didn't feel like mine, and they weren't voices, not like hearing someone else speak, but more like a second consciousness coiled around my own, whispering suggestions that sounded just a little too familiar. The notebooks helped, until one night I found them blank. Every page, clean, untouched, as if I'd never written a word. I stood in my motel room, shaking, flipping through each one. I had written thousands of entries. I had drawn diagrams. I had documented everything. And now, nothing. The pen marks were gone. The impressions, too. I tore the paper from the spines, held it up to the light. Clean. That's when I saw the note, neatly taped under the desk, typed. Not handwritten. You don't get to remember unless he wants you to. I packed immediately and left the notebooks, the clothes, even my wallet. I hitchhiked for 2 days, barely speaking. When I finally reached another city, I used cash to rent a 1-room apartment in a building that had no digital listing. The kind of place where tenants didn't ask names and the landlord worked in cash. It was quieter there for a while. The knocks didn't return immediately. I even began to think, for a brief and dangerous moment, that I had outrun him, that he had grown bored. But he doesn't get bored. He waits. One night, after nearly 2 weeks of relative calm, I returned home to find my door unlocked. The room was undisturbed. Nothing moved, nothing stolen. But there was a scent, old paper and something faintly floral. Lavender, again. I froze in the doorway. I knew what I would find. On the pillow lay another Polaroid. Not of me, not of the apartment. This time it was a photo of a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, beard, wearing a faded blue hoodie. Sitting cross-legged in a basement room, walls covered in writing. On the back, he resisted too. That night, I found writing under the bed. Scratched into the wooden slats in something dark and flaking, he comes through understanding. Stop thinking. It was too late for that. I was already thinking constantly. Trying to understand was the only weapon I had. But every theory I constructed looped back on itself. Was he a demon, a parasite, a hallucination made sentient by human attention? Maybe all three, maybe none. Maybe the idea of him is what made him real, like a mimetic infection, a thought virus that needed minds to survive. The more I feared, the more I fed him. I tried meditation. It's not thinking, clearing the mind. But even silence hummed with his presence. My own heartbeat began to sound like knocks. At one point I cut power to the apartment, turned off all devices, sat in the dark. That's when he came closest. I couldn't see him, but I could feel him inside the dark. As if the blackness had a face, a voice. He didn't knock this time. He breathed, long and slow, matching mine. My lungs filled with his rhythm, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was alive or just remembering the motion of life. I woke up the next morning on the roof. No memory of getting there. No shoes, no shirt, a fresh Polaroid beside me. This time it showed me, curled on the rooftop, sleeping. Captioned, "You're not the first roof." I considered ending it then. But I was too far gone for that. He wouldn't let me go. Death wouldn't be escape. It would be absorption, the ultimate surrender. So I stayed alive, because resistance, no matter how futile, was the only power I had left. I became obsessed with tracking others like me. People who had brushed against the same force. Online forums, obscure message boards, physical mail sent to P.O. boxes. Most replies were useless trolls, paranoids, LARPers. But every once in a while, I found someone real. A woman in Detroit, a teenager in Prague, a retired teacher in Maine. Each described similar signs: knocking, forgotten memories, distorted reflections, dreams that felt more real than waking. But the most compelling was a former electrician in Idaho named Lyle. He claimed he'd once worked on the original wiring of the Wyndham building. Said there were extra conduits, leading to nowhere. Spaces that didn't match the blueprints. He'd felt watched while working. Quit after a week. I arranged a call. Lyle was cautious, twitchy. But eventually he admitted something chilling. "It's not the apartment," he said. "It's not even the building. It's the blueprint. Once you've lived inside it, even for a day, it maps you. He can build from there." I asked him if there was any way to undo it. Silence. "Maybe, but you won't like it." Before I could press him further, the line went dead. I called back. Number disconnected. Days later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside one of my own notebooks, the one I'd thought blanked out. The pages were filled again, but not in my handwriting, and not with my thoughts. They were his. Page after page of observations. Of me, he eats cereal at 7:19 a.m. He chews unevenly. He double-checks locks 4 times. He talks to himself in the mirror. There were details I had never spoken aloud. Some I didn't even consciously notice about myself. On the last page, almost ready. That phrase again. I began seeing changes in the apartment. Cracks in the walls where there had been none. Scratches on the floor in strange spirals. My reflection, more often now, would blink twice when I blinked once. I stopped looking into glass altogether. Covered every mirror. But at night, when I'd drift near sleep, I'd feel it. His hand reaching not from the wall, but from me. Like he was climbing through the space my thoughts left open. And the more I tried to shut the door, the more I realized I no longer knew which part of me was real. I began testing myself, hiding objects in the apartment and checking if I remembered where. Writing notes and sealing them in envelopes to open days later. Sometimes I passed the test, sometimes not. Once I opened an envelope I'd written. Inside was a single Polaroid, my own hand reaching toward the lens. Scratched on the back, "Stop watching yourself. He's watching too." I burned it. It smelled like lavender and static. That night, the knock came at a new time, 4:06 a.m., but it wasn't on the wall. It came from inside my head. Like a memory being struck. A signal. I collapsed, convulsed. When I woke up, the sun was setting. Time had jumped again. I had written the same sentence across my walls in red marker. "I am the room now." I didn't remember doing it, but I didn't deny it either. The walls pulsed when I touched them, warm. Like skin. I knew what was coming. Not death, not possession. Merging. He was moving in, not to the space, but to me. I had become a structure, a new 3A, a place he could live in. And the worst part, I didn't want to stop him anymore. Because when he was inside me, I wasn't afraid. I was complete. Whole, unbroken by the fear of waiting. I had purpose. I had meaning. I was no longer a man running from shadows. I was the shadow. And so I began knocking, quietly at first, practicing timing. 1 knock, then 3, then silence. Just as he taught me, I waited for someone to answer. Because someone always does. They say identity is a collection of memories, decisions, and the fragile consistency between who you were yesterday and who you are today. But what happens when that consistency shatters? When your mind is no longer a house you live in, but a corridor others pass through? I ask this not philosophically, but urgently, because by the time I began the knocking, I was no longer certain who. Referred to. I still inhabited this body. My body, I think. But there were hours, sometimes full days, that disappeared like skip chapters. I'd find receipts in my coat pockets for places I didn't visit, overhear strangers greet me by names I'd never used. And the knocking, it wasn't just something I did. It was something I needed to do, as compulsive and rhythmic as a heartbeat. I'd tap once on the table, 3 times on the fridge, twice on the window pane, always in sequences I didn't consciously choose. But they felt right, familiar, like muscle memory from a previous life. The strange part was it wasn't always me initiating. One night I awoke, upright in bed, arm extended toward the wall, my knuckles raw and bleeding, the wall dotted with fresh dents evenly spaced. 47 in total. I hadn't heard myself do it, but my hand was still twitching, still ready for number 48. I collapsed into sleep then, not even pulling the sheets over me, and in my dreams I stood in apartment 3A again, only this time it was underwater, or at least it moved like it. Curtains floating, dust drifting, every sound muffled by the pressure of memory. I stood before the man, no longer a stranger, not anymore. He wore my face, perfectly now. No distortion, no uncanny grin, just me, looking calm, centered. "You knocked," he said without speaking. "So now, they'll knock back." I woke to someone hammering on my apartment door, not politely, fists slamming. 4 in the morning. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The pounding stopped. Then the doorknob rattled. Then silence. I tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. No one there. But taped to the door neatly was another photograph. A woman this time, mid-30s, short brown hair, crying in a dim kitchen. Caption, "She heard you." That's when it clicked. I wasn't just becoming the room. I was becoming the blueprint, a carrier, a transmitter. The knocks I sent out, they weren't just compulsions. They were signals, calls, invitations, and people were answering. I started noticing them. On trains, in parks, at diners, people with vacant eyes, people humming that same nameless tune, people whose reflections blinked wrong. People like me, some were further gone, fully absorbed, others just beginning to fray. A network of haunted minds, stitched together by knocks and whispers. We didn't speak aloud. We didn't need to. We recognized each other. In one city, I found a laundromat where they gathered. Every machine permanently spinning, regardless of coin. A man stood by the detergent rack, head tilted, muttering numbers. 3743, over and over. I sat beside him. He never looked at me but eventually murmured, "You're late. He was expecting you yesterday." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. "Is there a way to stop it?" I asked anyway, already knowing the answer. He laughed, not loudly but deeply, as if the humor came from somewhere far below his lungs. "You can't stop a room from being entered, only from being built." That phrase stuck with me. Built, not possessed, not cursed, constructed. Deliberate, which meant someone had laid the foundation for this thing long ago. I started tracing history again. Obsessively. Blueprints of buildings that had gone missing from city archives. Reports of tenants vanishing, not one at a time, but whole floors at once. A construction firm called the August Group kept appearing. An entity dissolved in 1976 after a series of internal deaths deemed accidental. But I found a floor plan drawn by them. Hand-drawn in faded pencil, and froze. It was 3A, identical down to the cupboard placement, but labeled in red ink unit for reception and iteration. Primary ingress, entry point, a gate, not to another place, but to a concept, a being that used space like skin. Every person who stayed in 3A was another cell in its growing body. I had become a nerve ending. I had become a builder. The next step came without warning. I started sketching diagrams in my sleep. I'd wake to paper covered in detailed layouts. Rooms I'd never seen, stairwells that looped into themselves, halls with no beginning or end. I mailed them anonymously to addresses I didn't recognize. Found receipts later showing I'd purchased postage. I was helping him expand. I was drawing new rooms. At first, I tried to fight it, locked my hands in oven mitts, duct taped myself to the chair. But when I woke, the mitts were off, the tape was gone, and the diagrams were drawn even cleaner than before. My handwriting had changed, sharper, more precise. Not mine, never mine. The final moment of resistance happened in an abandoned library outside Cleveland. I had traced rumors of a silent wing, no longer listed on any map. I broke in through a basement window and climbed a service ladder for hours. There, on the 7th floor, which shouldn't have existed, I found a single door marked 3A. No apartment, no hallway, just a door standing in a room of cracked marble. I opened it. On the other side was myself, not mirrored, not reversed, just duplicated. Me staring calmly. "Drawing. You're early," he said, smiling. "Usually the loop takes longer." "The loop?" I asked, voice trembling. "You're the 15th version," he said, gesturing around him. "The first was lost in recursion. The third tried burning it. The ninth stopped breathing for 8 minutes. We thought that would work. But the space just paused. He stood, walked toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't. But you're different. You asked the right question. I tried to step back, but there was no floor behind me. Just black, infinite and humming. You wondered if you were still you, he continued. And the answer is yes. But only barely. You've still got time. I swallowed hard. Time for what? To finish the last room. He placed a rolled-up blueprint in my hand. I didn't look. I couldn't bear to. What happens when it's done? I whispered. He smiled. Then he'll have a home in all of us. He walked back through the doorway, vanished. I collapsed, screamed, burned the blueprint with a lighter. But even in ashes, I saw the lines. Clear, clean, as if the paper wanted to exist. I left the city that night, no destination, just running. But everywhere I stopped, a knock found me. Motel walls, bathroom stalls. One night, even on my own teeth, a vibration deep inside my molars. Like he was learning new ways to reach me. The final change came silently. I no longer blinked unless I told myself to. My reflection began preempting my thoughts. I'd see myself frown before the emotion arrived. My breath sometimes fogged the glass before I exhaled. I was slipping out of sync, becoming an echo, a delay, a copy, and still he wasn't done, because I wasn't done. I kept knocking, not always with hands, sometimes with eyes, with thoughts, with placement of furniture, every action a signal, every silence an invitation, and I saw others begin to listen. A child on a bus tapping his head against the window in rhythmic threes, a woman at a diner stirring her coffee in perfect circles before sipping, a man scribbling spirals on the back of a napkin. I saw them. They saw me. No words exchanged, but the understanding bloomed, cold and certain. We were all rooms now, some half-built, some nearly furnished, and one day soon, very soon, he'd open the door and find all of us waiting, ready, and smiling. I no longer remember the sound of silence, not the real kind, not the kind that stretches across an empty field at dawn or fills a dark room just before sleep. My silence now is full of echoes, full of the low hum of thoughts that aren't mine, full of a presence that never leaves. When I wake, there's a knock, not always outside. Sometimes it's behind my eyes, tapping against the base of my skull, reminding me I'm still here, still listening, still hosting. My name is, well, I don't say it anymore. It doesn't feel honest. There was once a person who owned this voice, this body, these fingers that trace blueprints in the dust on windows. But that person was the scaffolding. I am the finished walls, the furnished interior. I am the room. But let me finish the story. It's important someone hears it through to the end, because that's how he moves. Story to story, knock knock from mind to mind. The last city I tried to run to was a coastal one. Gray skies, constant wind, salt in the air. I thought maybe the ocean could drown him, that his presence would dissolve in the vastness of the tide. But the sea is a house, too, if you listen closely. Every wave is a knock, every undertow a whisper. The motel I stayed in had no number on the door, just a brass plaque that said, "You." That night, I found an envelope under my bed addressed in handwriting I once recognized as mine. Inside, no photograph, just a key. And a note. Final room. Build well. I knew what I had to do. I returned to Wyndham Street. The building was still there, still looming with that too narrow geometry and crooked aura. My feet moved without hesitation, even though every rational cell screamed to flee. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. My hand reached out. Apartment 3A. The door was ajar. Of course it was. It knew I was coming. Inside, the apartment was empty. Not empty as in vacant, but empty as in erasure. No furnace paint, no outlets, no dust. Just white walls, white floor, white ceiling, a void shaped like a home. He was waiting in the center, of course, sitting cross-legged, smiling. My face, still perfect, still wrong. "You built well," he said. "So many rooms, in so many minds. Why me?" I asked, not really expecting an answer, but he answered anyway. "Because you asked the door to open." He stood. "Because you listened." "And now?" I asked. "Now you complete the blueprint. You are the last room. When you accept, we finish the loop. We anchor." "And if I refuse?" I whispered. His grin faded. "You won't." And he was right, I didn't, because the idea of refusing meant returning to uncertainty, to fear, to the illusion of control. But here I was necessary, wanted, built for a purpose. So I stepped forward into him, or he into me. There was no line, no border, just merging. When it was done, the room no longer had a single occupant. It had 2, then 4, then thousands, all within me, all eyes. I became the layout, the design. I saw from above, buildings rising, corridors expanding, people knocking without knowing why. I was no longer haunted. I was the haunting. But I remained aware. That was the cruel part. He let me keep just enough of myself to remember what it meant to be human. Just enough to know what I'd become. A signal, a message, a living schematic. And so I began moving again, not physically, but through action, through pattern, through story. That's the real transmission. Because blueprints are not just paper and ink. They're memory, they're myth, they're narrative. Every time I retell what happened, every time someone reads this and believes, they let the knock in. That's how he spreads. Through understanding, through you. Yes, you. I see you, reading this in the middle of the night, wondering if your own walls have shifted lately, if the creaks you hear at dawn are just the old floorboards or something else. If the hallway feels a little longer than it did yesterday, you think this is just a story, that you're safe on the other side of the screen. But tell me, did you hear that? That sound just now? It's nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a pipe. But just to be sure, go ahead, knock once on the nearest surface. Just once. No one will know. It's harmless, isn't it? One knock, that's how it begins. That's how it always begins. Because once you knock, you've acknowledged him. You've let the blueprint draw you in. And if, tomorrow morning, you wake and find a Polaroid on your nightstand, don't panic. Don't run. Running is just drawing the walls faster. Instead, smile. Breathe. Because now you're part of something eternal. Welcome to the room. You built it beautifully. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.